Good morning, and thank you for joining the call to discuss the results of the 2021 Summer Loads and Resources Assessment. I'm Christina Osborne with ISO Stakeholder Affairs. I'll be the meeting facilitator. Bob Emmert, who is the Senior Manager from the Interconnection Resources Group, will be the primary presenter, and he is also joined by two others from the Loads and Resources team, Mike Wu and Sam Hawks. The presentation and the assessment are posted on the Miscellaneous Stakeholder Meetings webpage, which can be accessed by using the link on the Stakeholder Initiatives webpage. The report is also available on the Bulletins, Reports, and Studies webpage, linked under the Stay Informed tab on ISO's website. It was posted on May 12th. So just a couple of reminders before we get started. We are recording the meeting today. We will post the video file out on the Miscellaneous Meetings webpage once it's available, usually 3 to 5 business days after the meeting. And we do ask that any related transcriptions not be reprinted without ISO's permission. What we're going to do, there are only 8 slides. So what we're going to do is go ahead and run through the presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions after that time. So to ask a question, you just press #2 on your telephone keypad, and the operator will open up your phone line. We do ask that you state your name and affiliation first. And if you feel more comfortable asking your question via chat, you can go ahead and send that directly to me. Calls are structured to stimulate an honest dialogue and engage different perspectives. And we just like to remind everyone to please keep comments friendly and respectful. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Bob Emmert.
Thank you, Christina. So if we could move, there we go, thank you. So the ISO develops a summer assessment each year in order to help prepare ISO operations as well as market participants of the type of operating conditions they should expect to be experiencing throughout the summer, both in more of a normal operating type conditions as well as more extreme type conditions. The summer assessment uses a production simulation model that runs 2,000 simulations based on historical renewable generation profiles in a range of 182 hourly load profiles based on historical weather. And as we did last year, this year again we ran 2 different simulation cases, basically in the same realm as last year, where we developed 2 cases around import sensitivity. So the base case is where import levels are set to capture most of the historical import levels during ISO on-peak hours. And then we developed a sensitivity case where monthly import limits were set to the 6-year average import limits were set to the 6-year average of the resource adequacy imports secured for the summer months. And this is where non-firm economic imports are assumed not to be available. So that's kind of the idea behind the sensitivity case. The results predict the risk of needing to call on extraordinary measures to reduce the load that can be accessed during extreme or emergency conditions, and I'll speak to this a bit more in a couple slides. And the 2021 report also presents results of a deterministic stack analysis of September 2021. So next slide, please. So to look at the key points, the ISO anticipates supply conditions in 2021 to be better than 2020. Potential challenges can arise if an extreme heat wave affects a substantial portion of the West, reducing the availability of imports into the ISO. Supply conditions are improved in over 2020 with roughly 2,000 megawatts of new resources, plus an additional 1,000 to 1,500 megawatts of expedited procurement not included in these simulations. These additional megawatts are expected to show up in the month-ahead RA showings. It is worth noting, however, though, that we are in the 2nd year of a significantly lower than normal hydro conditions, so that does impact the results as well. The 1 and 2 load forecast is relatively unchanged from 2020 at 835 megawatts. However, forecasted 1 and 10 loads are significantly higher. And to do a comparison to illustrate that, I have provided some information of the 2020 forecast as well as this year's 2021 forecast. looking at the relationship of the higher load levels to the 1 and 2. So looking at the 2020 forecast, the 1 in 5 load level was 4% higher than the 1 and 2 forecast, and the 1 in 10 load level was 6% higher than the 1 and 2 load forecast. Looking at 2021, the 1 in 5 remains 4% higher. However, the 1 in 10 is 11% higher than the 1 in 2 forecast. And the historical weather data shows that the probability of an extreme weather event is increasing. And the 1 in 10 forecast is one indicator of the increasing likelihood of experiencing significantly higher than average load levels. So to the next slide, thank you. Looking at the results of the stochastic modeling, results are improved over 2020, but the conservative net import sensitivity study shows reduced levels of net imports during high demand conditions significantly affect the system reliability. So this table shows the probability of system capacity shortfalls for both the base case and the sensitivity case described earlier. And we look at this primarily in conditions of a stage 2 or a stage 3 emergency conditions, where stage 2 is where the operating reserves have decreased to 6% or less, and a stage 3 condition is where operating reserves have declined to 3% or less, and this is the point where the ISO would begin firm load shedding. And we also show the probability of unserved energy, which is a condition where all operating reserves are totally depleted, and beyond that, the ISO is not able to serve 100% of the ISO load. So to look at the stage 3 emergency, which is the risk of actually having to shed firm load, under the base case, it's roughly 5%. And to put that into perspective, a 5% probability is equivalent to a 1 in 20 year event. So while within the range of a possible occurrence where we'd actually have to shed firm load into the base case, it's a relatively low probability. Moving into the sensitivity case, we can see these probabilities are significantly higher. And again, looking at the stage 3 level of 12.5, that's equivalent to a 1 in 8 year event, significantly more probable than the base case. However, I do want to kind of drive home the point that I stated earlier, that the existing new tools that are available to the operators that are not accounted for within these results, because it's hard to quantify those type of additional measures that the operators have as tools that they can call on, so they're difficult to model. And those tools will serve to actually decrease the probability of having to shed firm load. Tight supply conditions are more likely to occur late summer when hydro conditions decline to their summer low levels, particularly in September when solar ramps down earlier in the day. So next slide. So this slide is to demonstrate the risk is highest when solar is unavailable. So these blue bars demonstrate the worst 1 hour from each of the 2,000 scenarios when that worst 1 hour is at an operating reserve margin of 6% or less. So this is a sampling of the worst cases out of the 2,000 scenarios and are equivalent to that 6.4% probability of going into a stage 2 emergency condition on the previous slide. And so this shows the hours that those conditions actually occurred at, and we also show a profile of the solar generation. And this drives home the issues and concerns that we have, which is that the hours of greatest risk are during hours of low to no solar generation. So in essence, we have enough capacity when the solar generation is available, but as solar declines and during hot load conditions where the load remains pretty high even after the peak period, those are the hours of greatest risk for the ISO. Next slide.
Bob, we did receive a couple of chat questions. Want to go ahead and take those now, or do you want to keep going?
Well, let me take a look at them.
Sure. Let me send one to you.
If you want to go ahead and read them, Christina, you can.
Yeah, no problem. So from Rob Dyes, he asked, how are model results regarding system capacity shortfall better than 2020? Aren't 2021 probabilities 2 to 3 times higher than the 2020 report? They said, for example, stage 2 in 2020 was 3.7%. Stage 2 for 2021 is 6.4%.
So the reason is it's not quite apples to apples the way it was looked at in the 2020 assessment compared to this year. Last year, we ran a case of only RA imports, but we did not publish those results. So the sensitivity case for this year is equivalent to the case that we ran last year but was not published. So you can't really compare the sensitivity cases. And then looking at the nomogram that we developed for the base case, it is closer to the nomogram that was the sensitivity case for last year. So if you want to do a comparison from the 2020 report, the only real comparison you can do looking at the two reports side by side is the 2021 base case as compared to the 2020 sensitivity case.
Great, thank you. And then one more question from Peter McFerrin. He asked, are these time interval start times for HE, or hour ending, sorry?
Yes, these are all based on hour ending.
Okay, great, thank you. And Rob and Peter, if you have any additional questions you can, or follow-up questions, you can send them via chat. Okay, so we can go to the next slide.
Okay, so this is a diagram of the stack analysis that we performed, which was for the month of September for peak day conditions at 8 p.m. And we have...
Bob, for a second.
What's that?
You can keep going. Your phone was cutting out, so go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
So these are 3 different scenarios for the stack analysis for the month of September. I won't go through all the numbers of the stack that makes up the resources for each of these 3 stacks. I'm going to focus primarily on the numbers of the imports, which are the orange portion of these bars. And for the first bar on the left is where RA imports are at that 6-year average for the month of September, roughly 6,000 megawatts. And if you look at how this stack adds up, it doesn't quite get to these 2 green lines, which represent the 7.5% planning reserve margin, which is the new reserve margin for this year. And it doesn't quite get up to the 15% more historical planning reserve margin that we have used. Moving to the middle bar, where we've added roughly 2,600 megawatts to get to a total of 8,500 megawatts of imports. This level is the maximum RA procured imports that we've seen over the last 6 years. So if we get the maximum level of procured RA imports for September, we are able to meet both the 15% and the 17.5% planning reserve margins for the month of September. And I'll mention that this hour of 8 p.m. was chosen because at that point in time in September, we have no solar generation. And then moving to the far right bar, we have a total in this case of 9,500 megawatts of imports. And we got there by adding roughly another 1,000 megawatts of economic imports above the maximum RA contracted amount. And we can see this bar gets all the way up to this top dashed line, which represents the day-ahead load forecast for August 18th of 2020, including 6% operating reserves as well as 7.5% forced outage rate. So again, just driving home the fact of how important imports are during these kind of conditions within the ISO.
So Bob, one more question. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, this is from Al. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, Christina.
Sorry. Yeah, from Alan Padgett, he asked, could you expand on the 40,976 megawatt figure? Is this all in-state RA megawatts?
These are all the RA procured under the Resource Adequacy Program, and some of that could be in-state capacity that was procured as imports. So it's whatever the load serving entities actually procured and were shown to the ISO as imports.
Thank you, Bob. That's the only chat question.
And I understand there are new import rules for 2021, but these are based on historical conditions. So for conclusions, overall capacity conditions are better for 2020, but the grid remains vulnerable to high loads and availability of imports during widespread heat events. And low hydro conditions increase risk, particularly in late summer. Added storage and retaining 400 megawatts of generation to the reliability must-run process improves expected performance for 2021. Projected new capacity additions are expected to be effective in supporting system capacity needs during post-solar hours. I will note that this year, the ISO is expecting to have 10 times more battery energy storage resources on the system as compared to last summer. And the operators of those systems will need to ramp up on their learning curve quickly so they're prepared to operate their facilities effectively to meet ISO needs. Some of this new capacity has been online for a number of months, but some is still yet to come online, and some of that capacity is expected to not come online until August 1st. The probability of an extreme weather event is increasing, which will result in managing higher load levels more frequently. And to close out, improved awareness, communication, market tools, and development of contingency measures will help to increase system reliability if extreme conditions arise. So that concludes my presentation, and we'll go into the additional questions.
Great, thank you, Bob. So again, if you have a question, you can raise your hand by pressing #2. And please start by introducing yourself. Adam, let me know if anybody enters the queue, please.
All right, and we do have a caller in the queue.
Great.
Caller, your line is being unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Bob. Dan Williams from Customized Energy Solutions. Following up on your response to Alan Padgett's question on slide 7, I think it was, were you saying that, so that 40,976, were you saying that that included like pseudo-tie and dynamic RA imports that were considered, inside the CAISO BA, where the orange box is more, I guess, traditionally scheduled expected RA imports?
The orange and kind of the more flesh tone color imports are representing imports that were procured under the RA program, wherever they came from. And then in the far right bar where you've got that red hashed area, that includes economic imports that came into the market on a day-ahead basis, and that, wherever they came from or whether they may come from in the future. So we're not really designating where they're coming from, but just accounting for what has been procured in the past and what we might expect in the future. But it would include, resources that potentially could come on as dynamics.
Okay, so the lowest blue bar, the 4976, is just in-state RA program resources?
That's correct.
Okay. The other question that I had was just, will the ISO be sort of updating any of the sort of assumptions or doing any kind of refresh of the analysis as we get closer to August, September, and we learn more about the kind of actual import RA contracts that have been shown, or updates to hydro conditions or other things like that? Or does that just come now through any of the like summer readiness type of meetings, but not any refresh of these studies?
Well, there won't be anything officially published as a refresh of the summer assessment results as we go through the summer. We'll be keeping an eye on things and doing internal work to make sure we have a good understanding of what we have available to us. But we, at least through this process, we won't be publishing anything in those regards.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks for the follow-up.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Any other questions? Adam, I know we have a couple chat questions, but we'll go ahead and take the ones on the phones first.
We do not at this time have any questions in the verbal queue.
Okay, so Bob, we did get a question from Rob Dyes. Could you briefly describe your assumptions regarding in-state hydro?
Yeah, so what we model is actual generation energy amounts available to us across the summer based on historical hydro conditions. So what we do is we look at snowpack and reservoir levels and so forth and try to find a historical year that we think best represents what the hydro conditions are, and then go ahead and run that. And at the time we ran the model, because we have to run these models earlier, before the season may even be totally completed. But we looked at 2013 and we looked at the whole range and found that 2013 represented really the closest amount over a kind of a 3-year period of what it looked like, what the snowpack and reservoir conditions were 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and then the current year. And so we modeled the hydro conditions, or at least the energy amounts that were delivered from the hydro system from 2013. And we just run that particular set. We don't do any sensitivities around that. And it's basically a combination of run-of-river profiles as well as dispatchable hydro.
Great, thank you. And then from Chris McLean, CEC, not necessarily a question worthy of focused response, but could the version of Plexos which was used for the stochastic be confirmed? Was it 8.3? If so, which release?
Have to ask Mike Wu that. Might have to get back to you, Chris, on that one.
Yeah, and Mike is on the line. He's on the participant line. So, Mike, if you can raise your hand, press #2 to raise your hand to respond.
Yeah, Chris, we may have to get back to you on that one.
Okay. And then from Meredith Circle, is there a publicly available summary of hydro conditions per year so we could see how this year is turning out to be relative to 2013?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm not sure if we post hydro generation in Oasis or any that could be looked at and tracked or not, to be honest.
Okay, and this is all the questions we have in the queue, and Chris was okay with, I could just shoot him an email to respond to the Plexos version question. Any other questions in the queue, Adam?
We do not have any questions in the verbal queue at this time.
Okay, and then Mike Wu did respond via chat. He said Plexos version is 8.2. So hopefully that helps, Chris. Okay, that is, we do have another question that just popped up. So Jason Ortega asked, what was the megawatt hydro assumption for this analysis?
Well, it's a changing amount throughout the summer, and so it's not just a static number, and it declines throughout the summer.
Okay. Just giving it another moment in case the follow-up questions came up. But again, just a reminder, so the presentation that Bob went through is out on the miscellaneous stakeholder meetings page. So you can either go through the calendar for today's meeting. You can also navigate to it by going to the Stay Informed tab, select meetings and events, and you'll see miscellaneous stakeholder meetings linked there. Again, we did record the meeting today, and we will make that available as well on the same webpage. So usually it takes about 3 to 5 days for us to receive that from AT&T. Any other questions before we conclude? We do have some time.
I do see we have a question on the line.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Caller, your line is being unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hey, Bob, Dan from CES again. Since there's an abundance of time, I'll ask one more question. When you were responding to Rob Dye's in his first question, you said that the nomogram for the 2021 base case was similar to the 2020 sensitivity case. Can you just unpack that a little bit more for us as far as maybe what changed between the 2 years, or what's the same between the 2 years?
Yeah. So starting last year, we developed a nomogram. We've always had import limits within the model. Just to give a little background why we need that. The model runs the ISO in what I describe as the full range of weather-driven loads that we've seen over the last 26 years. But we model all of the rest of WEC, but only at 1 and 2 loads. And under those type of conditions for the remaining part of WEC, there's always going to be enough surplus capacity available for the model to find as economic imports to bring into the ISO. So it'll bring in more imports than really is appropriate in what we typically see in real-time conditions. So we developed a limit for the imports. And we have a nomogram that we developed that runs for the hours, the on-peak hours, and then whenever the load is within 90% or greater of the 1 and 2 load forecast. We took a look at what all the imports that we saw over the last 3 years. So last year we looked at the 3 years prior. This year we looked at the 3 years prior, which added 2020 and dropped off the earlier year. And so that population of imports was slightly less than it was beforehand. And it had a different shape, and we wanted to be a little bit more conservative than what we were last year. So it's something that we work out through, vetting through a number of folks internally what we think is the most appropriate declining type of nomogram. And that nomogram is shown in the report. And the 2 points that define that line you can see in the report. And the top line was based on where it's at 41,000 megawatts. We chose the highest import that we saw within the population of imports at the 41,000 megawatt load level, and then we chose the actual average of the RA imports for the summer period at the 1 in 10 load forecast level, assuming that when we get to 1 in 10 loads, we'll have roughly 61,000 megawatts of imports, which was the average number procured for the summer. And so that's what the line that we used this year to define imports. So a little bit different methodology of last year, but something we thought was a reasonable assumption for what imports would be under more normal operating conditions, where we see more than just the RE imports. We see some level of economic imports.
Okay, so I just kind of breaking down what I heard there, real high level is just trying to extrapolate if CAISO's in a certain load position, what maybe the rest of the WEC might be in, to give you a look at what assumption you should make around imports under that sort of kind of a west-wide impact.
Right. When you say west-wide impact, that's more of the sensitivity case of, well, what's going to happen? What do imports be like if all we have available to us are the RE imports? Well, we don't have any non-firm economic imports. So that's kind of the extreme import limit that we chose to do, and I like to think of it as kind of a bookend scenario. That's okay, if we get down to the lowest level of imports, which are the RE imports, what's it going to look like? Because we can't necessarily guarantee that we will get more imports than that. And then the base case is designed to pretty much capture everything we've seen historically for imports during the conditions across the summer.
Great. Well, thanks for unpacking that a bit more. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Any other questions?
We do have an additional question in the queue.
Yep.
Caller, your line is being unmuted. Please go ahead.
Good morning, all.
Oh, we can't hear you. Sorry. Can you repeat your name?
Yeah, this is Christopher McLean, staff at California Energy Commission.
Yep, go ahead.
Is that coming through better now?
Yes, definitely. Thanks.
Okay. Good. So just sort of a follow-on to, a theme I picked up in the last interchange. Bob, you've sort of noted an evolution to some of the modeling approaches, and that this year is slightly different from last year. I found the exchange between you and your team and the Board of Governors interesting, and it seemed like maybe there was a desire from the board to maybe incorporate some different approaches towards the load forecast and future impacts and how all of that's evolving. And I think maybe some of it's starting to show up in under the methodology that you're exercising now, but there seemed to be maybe a request for consideration of maybe some different forecasting methodologies. Have you given that any more thought about how you might respond to this board request, informal as it was? But and if not, it's only been days, so I don't expect that you necessarily have something immediately. But interested in hearing your thoughts about how this might evolve in the years to come.
Yeah, so kind of the exchange was around, number one, do we bias our forecasting in order to take into account the impacts of climate change? And we do not do that. Time will tell whether we do something like that in the future. I will say that just by incorporating another year of an extreme weather event from 2020, added, in essence, one more year where we've really had extreme weather events 3 times in the last 26 years, which is our weather data starts in 1995 forward. And so it adds another level of extreme weather events into that population, which somewhat significantly increased the high end of the distribution of load forecasts that come out of our forecast models. So while we don't bias it, I think just adding 2020 weather, which had 2 extreme events in it, at least notably increased the amount of the high load forecast and the probability of a high load forecast, where before getting into an extreme condition was a lower probability, 1 in 10. Now it is within that range of a 1 in 10, even slightly less than that. So I think the forecast model is doing a good job of capturing what is happening to climate change. The one thing that we may want to consider is, do we want to maybe shorten the historical period and shorter to some, I don't know what yet, haven't really had any internal discussions to that effect, but we may want to shorten it and start dropping off some of the years in the 90s. And for example, just having 20 years of history, which would then increase some of the forecasts. There were, in the late 90s, there were some higher loads, but not the extreme loads. So in the end, we haven't decided what we're going to do, but that's something we will be looking at, and I imagine we'll have some discussions with the CEC and their load forecasting group as well related to that issue.
Excellent. Sounds great. Thanks, Bob.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions, Adam?
We do not have any additional questions in the queue at this time.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your questions today and your participation, and enjoy the rest of your day.